computers. This is Intelligent Performance.
Nikki Williams, welcome to the Intelligent Performance podcast. It is a pleasure to have you with us. And you are the founder of a new organization called Mentwell and a very strong advocate for arguably self-care, right? Helping people take care of themselves better and also supporting others to make that process or encouraging others to take care of themselves. So first of all, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And where I'd love to start is actually, like with all guests, what's your take on intelligent performance?
Well, thank you first and foremost for having me. I'm so stoked to be having this conversation with you. In terms of intelligent performance, I lean into the idea of EQ being one of the most important and foundational elements of how we operate as humans. And I don't believe that we can have intelligent performance without focusing on EQ on a daily basis. And for me, what that means is being aware of how I'm feeling from the second that I wake up to the time that I go to bed, and being able to have the autonomy to choose and move to activities that I need, depending on how I'm feeling, how my energy levels are, and even who I'm hanging around and what food I'm putting into my body.
Interesting. So, excuse me, tell us, you've done a lot in this space now, right, in terms of wellness. Sorry, Nikki. The irony of coughing, we talk about wellness.
We need to get you into some breath work, I think. Did you get that water in the end?
It's so funny. It's so funny. I was like, I don't need water. Oh, so talking about wellness, these eyes on the podcast. Thank God for editing. We can cut this out.
Amen.
So, that's so funny. So here we go.
I'd love that blooper, please.
We'll put that right at the start. So I love that, Nikki. So you've done a lot in this actual wellness space. Tell us from just quickly, what do you think's not working about kind of self-care or how we're administering or helping people actually access these kind of services?
I think from a personal perspective, I see a lot of people, for example, going to the gym to make changes physically to their body. It's about beefing up. It's about the physical appearance of, what we look like. Whereas for me, it is more useful to be able to tap into ourselves on a more regular basis to understand how we're feeling. The gym isn't just the only answer when it comes to wellness. For me, it's about being able to reflect, for example. It's about understanding how my body is operating and trying to make it operate at a high level on a daily basis. So I think what's not working is a more holistic approach to wellness, which is talking about, yes, the physical body, but also our emotional body, our sensory body, and also about connection too, and networks. So there's a lot more to be spoken about from a wellness perspective globally than just how we're looking, if that makes sense.
100%. I think we've often, I'm thinking from a masculine perspective perhaps, is that, we've linked big biceps to feeling or being as a sign of healthiness. And that's really, those two are certainly not correlated necessarily, right? So just tell us about your story here. How did you even get to this piece where you're trying to create change when it comes to, this more holistic wellness piece?
Great question. And this is where it gets super interesting. So to be very honest with you, my 20s were catastrophic. It's the only word I can think of.
Right.
I was having 3-day benders on weekends. I can now talk about this.
Wow.
I know. I was working in hospitality a lot of the time. I was running another business, a PR and digital marketing agency. And for anyone who's worked in an agency environment, it is fast paced, it is intense, it's hard work. And I was burning out left, right, and center, but I was using drugs and alcohol and hanging out with the wrong kinds of people as a way to manage that stress. And everything came to a crux in COVID, when I just realized that it wasn't feasible for me to keep operating in that particular way. And I started tapping back into yoga again. And I didn't know why I kept on being called back to yoga, but I knew that I had to keep on practicing it. Then after COVID, I took myself away for a year and a half. I traveled the world. I tried a whole lot of different health and wellness modalities, from a lot of breath work, for example. I did my yoga teacher training. I also went to see a psychotherapist in the middle of the Balinese jungle who did a lot of work for me. Um,
We're going to touch on that.
I know. And going even further back, I actually had a medical phobia from the age of 4. So the idea that I started reaching out to these different
Mm,
service provider types and even going to the doctor just for fun is something that I started doing. It seems crazy, but that's how I operate these days.
right.
If there's a fear there, I make a choice to get through that fear so that I can actually become a better human and a better all-rounded human. And so, long story short, in that year and a half, I stopped drinking. Drugs are not a part of my life anymore. I'm surrounded by people who have really deep, connected conversations with each other on a regular basis. I live
Mm.
near the ocean. I go for a swim every day. I do yoga every day. I'm up at 4:40. I'm down by 8:45. As you can see, life is very different. And if I can give the gift of what I've been through utilizing service providers in the health and wellness space, then I don't think there's anything better to dedicate my time and life to.
Just take us into one of these benders. What does that mean, Nikki? Like, how extreme were we talking?
Oh, pretty extreme, to be honest. If anyone's lived in Melbourne before, Revolver was pretty much my second home. Uh, I'd be finishing work on a Friday at say 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. I'd be going
Oh.
to Revs by 3 a.m. I'd have a group of people with me too. It was our normal. There
Mm.
was nothing bizarre about it. What was bizarre about it was coming through a 1 or 2 night bender to the other side going, I feel fine. That's an issue.
Wow.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because of the quote unquote stamina you developed living this lifestyle? Because I think that's one thing I took away from university. My ability at university to consume insane levels of alcohol, which today would knock me on the floor. It became very normal, and to the point where if I couldn't consume a certain level, it just wasn't fun. And is that what you mean?
Yeah, definitely. For me, one drink was too much and 10 was not enough.
Right.
Definitely. But in addition to that, this is why I'm an advocate for EQ practices in general and wellness practices, because
Mm.
on a daily basis now, I try and ground myself. I try and get in touch with myself. I ask myself questions about how I'm feeling and what I need. And the more that I can do that, the more that I know that healthier practices like yoga, like breath work, whatever it might be to the individual, but those are a few for me, that those are better ways to reach a high level, if you will, a high level of happiness, a high level of contentment instead of alcohol and drugs. So, to be honest with you, it feels as if in my life I've replaced these false highs with positive highs. And that is a more conscious way to live. And yeah,
Mm.
it's way more satisfying than going on 2 or 3 day benders because there's no come down.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I think it's interesting you mentioned the industries there, hospitality, digital agency, kind of media, fast paced, high pressure, everything's needed yesterday. Living, even hospo as an example of outside of cafes, I mean, like restaurants, bars, that kind of piece. It's kind of almost like comes with the territory because everyone leaves work about midnight. And then it's like, well, I'm kind of buzzed because I've just fit to come off my shift. Should we go for a drink? Like it's and kind of kicks on thereafter, or maybe everyone's doing that and you don't want to be antisocial or something like that, and then you need a pickup at that kind of midnight, kind of weird time of day. So it's what do your Balinese psychiatrist help you realize?
I'm so glad that you went back to this story. So it was a recommendation from quite a close friend to go see this gentleman who lived literally in the middle of the Balinese jungle. As in, I had to walk down a number of different unnamed, they were like alleyways in the middle of the jungle. Beautiful flowers everywhere, just by the way. Into his house that was very secluded. I didn't know really what I was in for. All I knew was that he had an osteo background, but he was very, very well studied, and that he came into psychotherapy as his core modality type.
Right.
And I came to him with the question, why do I find it so difficult to tap into anger? That was the question that I had about
Oh.
myself. As you can tell, I had already been traveling for a year and I was very much into personal development and curious about myself and about how people operated as a whole.
Mm.
And so he put me into a deep meditative state. I was lying down, for example, there was music on. He would walk me through getting into my body, making sure I was paying attention to my breath. And he took me back to a particular time in my family where mum and dad were fighting a lot, and I was the only kid at home. And I had been a huge support to my mum in particular. And my memory of this moment was that there was a physical altercation between my mum and my dad. But actually, when I was taken back in this meditative state, it was me that was a part of the altercation. And as a result, working through that anger in real time allowed me to not only see the facts of what happened in that moment, but also to process some of the anger that was associated in that particular time in history. And
Mm.
what was really interesting was not only did I ask mum about this moment later on, and she did indeed say that that's how it went down, but I also knew for the first time the impact of what anger has to relationships and to the way that people operate in the world as an automatic. So I'll give you an example. Afterwards, I went for lunch on my own, and there was a guy next to me. I was already feeling pretty gross, but this guy next to me dropped a pen, and I swear to God, I could have got up and I don't know what I wanted to do, but it was not a healthy thing for me to be thinking, that's for sure. But I was
Okay.
I was just so heightened. I was so tense. I was so irritable as well. And it made me realize that there are people who operate in the world on that level on a day-to-day basis. And
Mm.
as a result, why would I not want to help get people down to a better baseline level of well-being?
Wow, that's powerful question to start with, though, right? And one, anger is such an interesting emotion. One, and I think maybe I'm wrong, Nikki, but especially talking about female anger, right? I think the masculine anger is kind of, well, I think men are certainly told not to be angry these days, largely speaking, and that's kind of bad, and if that could be seen as quote unquote toxic. But I think it's not a topic of female anger here spoken about very much. I think it's a tricky one. Whereas I've actually found anger to be an incredibly powerful force, if directed in the right way, right? And if you can't tap into that, then there's definitely you're missing a certain level of potential power which you could tap into, right? And then we're coming back to intelligent performance, like, intelligent for us is really like using all the things you've got accessible to you, all the tools, not just saying, oh, I'm just going to be really good at XYZ. It's like saying, I'm just going to use Twitter. It's like, I'm going to use all of the different tools you could potentially use. So, but coming into a corporate space, and this is where you've now started to focus, there's lots of these kind of EAP, employee assistance programs. Yeah, I've used one myself, and I found it was okay. I was really impressed that the employer was open to actually providing it. What do you think's not quite right or really not working about that space?
Hmm. So I'll start by saying I've never worked in corporate necessarily. I've always had my own business, or I was working in hospitality, in small businesses. I've always been an entrepreneurial type. So the mere idea to me that an employer will dictate to an entire cohort of people what health and wellness means to their cohort simply doesn't make sense to me. It is only by testing and trialing different modalities and different ideas of health and wellness that I've been able to find what works for me. And
Mm.
therefore, that's what I think is not working. EAPs in particular are a band-aid approach, if you ask me. It is an excuse, really, I hate to say it, for corporates to go, if you have a problem, go talk to someone else because we don't want to have to deal with it. That's how it feels to me. And
Mm.
certainly in terms of how the people that I've spoken to and done research with as well into how they've experienced an EAP program, and I'd love to hear your experience too, Michael. They say that it was an untrustworthy process. Number one is the feedback that we get. So there's a stigma attached to the fact that your corporate entity that you work for wants you to see this group. Uh,
Mm.
on top of that, the actual service provision is usually given by counselors. They're not psychologists. And so there's those are just two of the issues that seem to be coming up. And I think there needs to be a better way to consider what health and wellness does mean, not just when an issue comes into someone's life, whether it be in business or a personal life, but also going backwards and going, what does preventative care actually look like? And how can we focus on that within a corporate environment? I think that's the question that we need to answer.
I think I might challenge a little bit what you say there, in that I think it's actually incredible that companies are willing to offer some service. I think we could critique the piece around, is it the right one? I think you mentioned the word preaching, or kind of being very descriptive around this is the way you should treat wellness. Personally, that wasn't my experience. And I was very grateful that I was working in a remote team, and the challenges of that can be tricky to navigate. So seeing my company, or at the company I was working with, offering some support in that space, yes, it was a bit like, well, here's how you do it. I think certainly having a smorgasbord, which is what we're going to get onto in a minute, in terms of choice, I think that would have been really, really powerful. Just in terms of how it actually went, what was interesting in my experience was the first time I was like, and kind of embraced it quite openly. And then my experience was kind of talking to some guy. There was certain questions around, like, is this going to get back to my company? Like, and I think it was kind of, there was a level of assuredness that it wasn't. I think, like there was certainly a question mark. The tricky part was it turned into a pitch for his coaching services, and he sent me additional information about signing up for his program. That was
Wow.
So it quickly escalated, because I think it was, the EAPs, they have like limited service provision, right? They got maybe 3 sessions and then that's it. And if you feel like you can't solve the problem in 3 sessions, then, well, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? I think, and that's a tricky. Then the question is, well, what's out of scope for a corporate versus in scope? How supportive must they be? So I don't know what your take on that in terms of that. I don't know if you'd call that pushback on what you've said, but I think that's certainly my take on it.
I think EAP served a purpose when health and wellbeing and mental health in particular started coming into our conversations, when we realized that, hang on a second, health doesn't just mean physical health, it means mental health, it means emotional health. So it has provided a platform or an avenue for people to start talking about their problems. That's wonderful. That's great. And it's great the businesses have got behind that, but times have changed. And since COVID in particular, the mental health crisis has escalated hugely. 1 in 5 people are suffering from a mental health crisis as we speak. And it's costing businesses $39.9 billion a year in lack of productivity and absenteeism. Huge stats. So as a result, the mental health and wellness capacity of businesses to help their employees needs to increase with the times. And EAPs, yep, they still hold a huge portion of what health and wellness means from a business perspective, but there are other options available. And I guess that's where Mentwell comes in.
So tell us about Mentwell. What's the kind of premise behind it?
Sure. So this was a light bulb moment in my life where I realized that I wanted to help a friend pay for a psychology appointment.
Wasn't in the Balinese jungle, was it?
I guess the concept kind of did start further back, to be honest. It's all very linked and intricately linked, that's for sure. I could just say a monkey told me or something, but so I realized that if I wanted to help a friend pay for a psychology appointment in a time of need, that the only way I could do it was by transferring cash to her through her bank account, from my bank account to her bank account. I didn't have her bank account details. She lived interstate as well. She wasn't in a place to have a big conversation with me either. So as a result, I was like, why doesn't this exist? Why can't I just help someone pay for a psychology appointment? That should exist. And as a result, I put that concept together with testing and trialing different modalities in my own life, so my own lived experience. And I realized that if I created a gift card that showed all health and wellness services and categorized them as well, then that could challenge the stigma associated to mental health as well, and propose the idea that actually mental health is a part of health and wellness and they should be combined. in addition to that, obviously, I love yoga, as I mentioned, and Ayurveda and practices that are related to yoga too.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to put together a platform that showed Eastern and Western modalities on the same platform, because you know what? All of those service providers are trying to achieve the same thing. So why aren't we talking about that? And so
Interesting.
I created Mentwell.
So it sounds like it gives a lot more choice to, and you mentioned just before we jumped on about the three different categories. So remind me those again, because I think I really liked how it gave me as someone who, let's say I'm having a tough time. Oh, yeah, well, what are the options I've got? So yeah, talk us through that.
Yeah, for sure. So category number one, or bucket number one, is called identification. And that includes all GPs, all dentists, all allied health, all psychology, all talk therapy, psychiatrists, etc., Australia-wide.
Right.
Then
Wow.
we move on to transformation, bucket number two, which is all alternative and complementary based therapies. So that can be anything from kinesiology to acupuncture, maybe Chinese medicine, whatever that person wants to tap into. And it's very important. This is a part of the messaging I'd personally love to get out there more so, that these services are designed to be used in correlation with identification services. It's not one or the other. They're supposed to be used together. Okay.
Identification services meaning what?
Identifying the core root of the problem.
Okay, got you. So,
Mm.
like so the Balinese psychiatrist, as an example, as an identifier, and then the actual treatment could be yoga. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yoga does straddle a couple of the buckets, for the heads up. And actually, the psychotherapist that I saw has a number of different modalities under his belt. So
Right.
if I had it my way, I would be telling people to go see these service providers who are actually more holistically minded. They've studied all of the buckets really, and now they've created a modality that straddles all three of them.
Interesting.
Okay. Rather than
Interesting.
just a doctor. You can't, in my experience, I never went to a doctor and got a life-changing experience. With this psychotherapist, I can truly say that I opened up something new in the way that I operate in the world.
Because and you credit that to the kind of cross-pollination of ideas, that those kind of different modalities. I think, yeah, it's an interesting point you make there, because GPs, as an example, kind of they can present a very lackluster response. But once they really understand other modalities, I think I'm thinking about GP who really understood psychology really strongly, and that made her appointments, a huge advocate, and even sold me on the idea of using psychology as a mode to treat, or effective treatment, opposed to what's often misconstrued as just kind of whinging to some other person who in a paid forum, like that. So that's very interesting. Okay, so those three buckets. So let's just say I'm going to make Bob. Bob's having a tough time. I send him a card and say, "Hey, Bob, sort yourself out. Here's $200 towards." I'm guessing I'm not necessarily, you should go and see a psychiatrist. I'm saying here's $200 to help you on your wellness journey. Is that the kind of conversation I'm having?
That's the conversation you're having, exactly. And let's keep in mind too, it's a digital product, so you don't need to have the big scary conversation with him. We're kind of doing it for you, in that it's just a suggestion that he looks after himself in the way that he sees fit. When we do have some personalization available too. So when you are buying a card for someone, we have recommended things that you can say or add into the conversation when you're sending that card. So it could be, I know you've been having a hard time. Here's a little gift for you to do something that you think will help you. Okay.
So how do we navigate? Let's take this Bob scenario, just to get really granular here, Nikki. If I'm concerned about Bob, does he have to know it came from me, or would he just see something pop up saying that someone's recommend you see a psychiatrist or something like that? How would it actually show up in Bob's land?
Yeah,
For
good
Bob.
question. So we
Get
do
on
have
Bob.
the capacity to, well, it's already a product actually. You can send a card anonymously. So if you, again, don't want to have the big scary conversations with Bob, you can buy him a card, add in his email address and his phone number, and Bob receives a card that says, "Hey, from Mentwell, here's some cash to use on any health and wellness service provider Australia-wide. You choose what that means to you." Job done.
And what does he know about my involvement there? Does he not? Does he kind of just say someone's nominated you or something like
Someone cares about you. That's really the
that?
word that we use up top.
That's a cool. It's an interesting message. How does that? What's the feedback from actually case studies where that's been utilized?
It has been incredible. Those who have received anonymous cards are actually
Hmm.
the ones that we're getting the most feedback from. So, for
Right.
example, there was one customer who received a card anonymously, and we got this email. I cried for a good day once I got this because what they said was, this is an amazing product. It's going to help so many people. And I actually want to get in touch with the person who sent me this card so that I can start the conversations with them about what I'm going through. And so, although this is a relatively small business at the moment, so I went out of my way to connect with both people and go, okay, is there any danger here in terms of the person who received the card going, stuff you, why would you do this, etc. I can see what you're insinuating. And it was just not that conversation. It was very honest. It was
Yeah.
very open from both sides. And now they've sent me another email saying, thank you so much because we've got a deeper connection than what we had previously. So if we look at the potential for what Mentwell can do, not only are we challenging the stigma of mental health, not only are we providing financial assistance for people to get health and wellness support, but we are actually increasing human connection between those that we love. And
Mhm.
for me, that's a super powerful thing to do in this lifetime.
And that's what I was talking to a neuroscientist about exactly this issue, is that the biggest problem we're seeing with hybrid working, online things, it's really like even right now, you and me look like we're quote unquote connecting, but we're missing out on so much which you might normally do from like a physical if we were sat there in a coffee shop and I kind of see your body language, right? So the connection piece is what you're saying is really missing, and opening up that, like, it is a tricky conversation to take it, being a friend of Bob to not really talking about psychology and dark times, and I think that's a really soft, hey man, I just want to let you know I care, or something like that. It's a really powerful message. Use it how you want. That's a cool framing, and I think it's heaps more impactful than sending a bloody hamper. You know what I mean?
Exactly, exactly. I mean, flowers, they die within a week. Chocolates and alcohol, they're not good for our health. Don't know about you, but I have been on a hot air balloon ride thanks to Prezi or hot red balloon. Did it change my life? No.
No,
But
yeah.
well, genuinely can. So yeah, I will just add on too. So I've mentioned the first two categories of services, but the third one is called maintenance, which is yoga and Pilates studios, gyms, wellness centers, retreats. So anything to do with things that kind of people are more used to doing from a health and wellness perspective more regularly.
Mm.
Um, so a Mentwell card doesn't need to be used for a psychologist. It can be used for a massage, for crying out loud, but it's up to the individual to choose what that looks like to them.
So how does that masseuse actually claim that cash back? So Bob walks in, he realizes, or he's like, maybe I just need a really good massage. He walks in, he's got this thing from Mentwell. How do you transact that piece?
Yeah, it's the same thing as like a MasterCard, for example. However, it is capped only at health and wellness service providers, as mentioned, in those three categories.
Right.
So the card details can be used when booking online, or it can be used just by tapping and going at the time of purchase via an FPOS machine. So
Got you.
really simple to use. It already works with the way that we think about paying for these services. So yeah, it's good to see people already using them.
So it's actually, so you said, I think just before, it's a digital card. So that would effectively make you some sort of fintech, Nikki. Would that be right?
Oh, I get asked this so much. I don't like being pigeonholed, quite frankly. We straddle the lines between fintech to health tech to
Yeah.
Q tech is another one that people have
Tech.
mentioned,
Okay.
wellness tech.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't really mind what category we're put in. Or we've been told we're a SaaS entity as well. Whatever you want
Yeah.
us to be, I'll go with it.
Whatever, yeah, okay. It's they can be unhelpful terminology, I think, largely, can't they? So yeah, good point. So all right, so Bob walks in, he's got this digital card, he can tap it with this masseuse. That's really cool. Bob gets taken care of. I get to expand my conversation with Bob. Really, really cool. You I'm interested. So Beyond Blue, these organizations, they're doing a lot in this space already. How have they kind of responded to, is Mentwell a competitor in this space to them? Are you trying to channel extra funding towards you, or how do they kind of look at this?
Yeah, so we're in conversations with a number of charities at the moment, and we're trying to see who's going to champion this idea. They're kind of doing due diligence at the moment. In an ideal world, we want a charity that represents mental health, so Beyond Blue or Lifeline, we'll say, to create co-branded cards. So let's say it's a Beyond Blue healthcare card that is powered by Mentwell, to then do a marketing campaign around the idea of gifting wellness. So that means people that know someone who is going through a rough time can buy a card that is labeled Beyond Blue, or they can buy a Mentwell card, either or. So, long story short, we believe that gifting as a whole started with physical gifts. Then we went into experience-based gifts, and this is the 3.0 of gifting. And we're giving a charity the opportunity to be at the forefront of that trend, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably have an answer in the next few weeks in terms of who really champions that. So it's a huge opportunity for us. It's a huge opportunity for them. And just so that everyone knows out there, my ambition here is to bring this idea of gifting wellness to global communities. I also
Cool.
want to be able to help out homeless people. I want to be able to help out Aboriginal communities as well, those who suffer PTSD, ongoing problems. And there are ways to infiltrate those communities through charities too. So there's a few different integrations we're talking about, whether it be charities buying the cards and then distributing to their beneficiaries, or creating a co-branded card to be at the forefront of the movement of gifting wellness.
The revenue model of Mentwell, I imagine you're taking a clip of the ticket, Nikki, or is it a set fee? How do you kind of make that a fair transaction, given you're adding a lot of value in this system, arguably, or maybe creating efficiencies in terms of intent to delivery?
Yeah, so you've said it well there in terms of creating value for charities and for organizations. I think that's what we do. We're a shortcut to making sure that charitable funds get into the hands of those that need it.
Yeah. In
And
the way they want to spend it, right?
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, because up to 65% of charitable funds at the moment are going to admin fees, which from a marketing perspective, I understand it needs to have, those entities need some of that awareness cash or
Yeah.
awareness-based cash, but the stats are too high. And Mentwell is a shortcut to make sure that charitable funds are doing the right thing. Anywho, in terms of the cut and proportion that we take, it's a 1.8 to 2.8% sliding scale of commission on each card load. It's at the moment, it's sitting at 2%. And we also have a secondary revenue stream for service providers too, for them to claim their account, to manage their account in our directory, and we will have advertising opportunities for them as well.
Okay, cool. And then that's kind of the card fees would be in addition to that, or that would be separate?
So there's no card fees for service providers. It's, as I mentioned, it's the same thing as FPOS. We don't need to do a deal with the service providers. They're already applicable on the card.
Yeah. Okay,
As a
cool. But when you
result,
transact with no card fees, there's no like 1% or 1.1% that's kind of deducted off. How does that kind of factor in?
that will depend on the individual service provider. So if it's tapped on usually, then it will still be tapped on to the overall service provision amount.
Okay, cool. Yeah, very cool. It's that feels like a reasonable amount, right? 2% for like let's not like, oh well, how's that? Actually, tell me, I saw a smart company article about you. It was like $5 million worth of transactions already, or something like that. So that's a massive number for a company which is new, and to your huge credit. Can you talk about what that was and who those transactions were from?
Yeah, sure. So those are business purchases. So we're seeing a lot of social impact driven entities and businesses who see the benefit of using Mentwell instead of other health and wellness provisions,
Right.
taking up the use of Mentwell cards on a regular basis for their cohort, for their employees. So what
Okay.
that looks like is the likes of FunLab, for example. They are doing a pilot at the moment, but the conversation is going that 4,600 odd staff members are going to receive $150 to $250 in a Mentwell card form on a quarterly basis.
Wow.
So as a result, it's pretty easy for this business to be self-sustainable, given those measures, but we do need to get to the masses. And a
Mm.
good way for us to do that is through businesses. And it's already happening clearly with 5.8 mil already secured for 2024.
So the obvious, like, let's say, danger to your business would be companies just choosing to pay their employees extra cash. So they could. Why do they feel like sending it to you first is a better way to do it?
I think because employers rather, know at the moment that health and wellness is the only way to increase productivity and increase or decrease absenteeism. They're the two killers at the moment that reach that $39.9 billion loss that we're experiencing through businesses Australia-wide annually. It's a huge stat.
Yeah.
As a result, why are we giving people Woolworths cards when, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, food is right down the bottom? People are going to buy food anyway, even if the cost of goods is increasing and wages are staying stagnant, they're always going to buy food. But are they going to prioritize looking after themselves? No. Therefore, this is the next level of care that businesses need to give their cohorts so that they can still work productively, they can still be effectively working humans, and so that they can still connect and keep harmonious relationships within the business as well.
In terms of these early case studies, how are you seeing employees respond versus the EAP traditional model?
Interestingly, we are doing some research with that FunLab cohort currently. I had a look at the stats yesterday, and 100% of the surveyed people have said that they prefer Mentwell cards over EAPs.
Interesting.
Not bad. So yeah, so far it's seeming as if even
Do they
if
say why?
we don't have too many follow-on questions regarding why, but certainly there are people alluding to the security measure that they get to choose
Yeah.
what health and wellness looks like to them.
Yeah.
And there are people alluding to the fact that they've tried to use an EAP too and had pretty average experiences. So those are just two of the measures.
I think, yeah, I'm just thinking about one of the last corporate organization I used to work with when it comes to Christmas gifting. Like, I joke about the hamper things, but like we were literally we'd scratch our heads and go, what's better? What do we actually do? And we pretty much, like, I liked hamper, especially teams, like some of the teams we were engaging with or working with, like it kind of helps them feel better, but you can't help but feel that they're just getting inundated. If you're working with a customer, they're getting inundated with chocolates, as you mentioned, fancy biscuits, which cost, 3 times you'd never buy them normally, that kind of thing. It's, yeah, and I'm not sure if that's a space you're particularly looking at, but I feel like the corporate gifting piece would be a massive industry, I would imagine. But I don't know. What do you think about that space?
Yeah, I think we're stuck in the past when it comes to corporate gifting. As I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, flowers, really, do we need them? Do they do they make a big difference in our lives? In a time
Uh,
where everyone's pinching pennies and watching the way that they're spending, are flowers really going to help them on a day-to-day basis? The answer is no.
mm, mm,
Chocolates are not good for our health. Biscuits, great. Are they really making an impact in our life? No. Why aren't we funneling money into services or access to services, I should say, that are going to help benefit us in the long run? And
mm,
imagine what could happen if every person globally, I'm going to go really big on you now for a second, if every single person globally, that includes people who are currently discriminated against or those who are in minorities, uh,
mm,
did have funds to take care of themselves
mm,
on a regular basis, what would
mm,
happen to our economy? What would happen to how we treat one another? What would happen in terms of how people are thinking, in terms of how they use their time? We'd have more people, I can almost guarantee it, working on solving climate change. We'd have more people focusing on how to bring communities together and how to help with efforts that are needing human support at the moment, on the account that people are able to look after themselves and get access to services that are going to help them in the long run.
mm. It's cool, Nikki. I really like it. I think you can certainly see the potential in it. I think it's yeah, it's a really interesting business you built. There's a lot of purpose behind it, which is very cool. Fintech can be quite a soulless industry, and just that you touch on, just because it's moving of money, right? And but I think what you're able to do is if it's also an incredible vehicle for good, right? If you can streamline that, make it easy. But it's really about empowerment. That's the biggest one I'm taking away from this conversation. It's about empowering the end user, not trying to dictate terms as to this is what you should do, this is how to solve a problem. It's like, well, how do you want to do it? You know, like, what does that look like for you? Nikki, okay, well, maybe you need that psychiatrist in the Balinese jungle. Okay, cool. You know?
Good for you.
I had the pleasure of sitting down with the founder of Virtual, a guy called Matt Vitale. He talked about his ayahuasca experience over in Costa Rica. You know, like, we all have our different flavor. That's cool. Let's respect that. Let's empower rather than kind of constrain.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Matt is such a powerhouse, and I'm so excited because we are actually doing a virtual campaign in May of this year. So to be able to work with him and his team, I'm so excited.
Awesome.
And it's just so great that he has a similar mindset to me as well. As much as I'm not doing ayahuasca ceremonies frequently, I've gone a different route to kind of find myself, which is yoga. But certainly plant medicine is a hugely spoken about topic these days. And I love that he's championing that and being so open about it. So yeah, health and wellness, again, means something a bit different to everyone.
And that is quite okay. So, look, a great place to finish this conversation, Nikki. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm. We've had to reschedule this interview a few times, so I just want to say thank you again for your patience, especially with my lack of tech expertise or capability sometimes, which is shocking, to put politely. So, Nikki, thank you. We wish you the very best with Mentwell. And yeah, super exciting opportunity, I think, with the virtual platform as well. We'll look forward to seeing more about that campaign.
I love your work, Michael. Thank you so much for such awesome questions and getting down to the nitty-gritty of things as well. And yeah, you're sharing such an important message through this podcast. So thanks for all you do.
My pleasure.